And I'm Dave Phillips. I have been around the university for a while, 22 years, and been with the CCTS since we started in 2008. Before that, and currently, I'm been with the Clinical Research Center. I'm business manager for the CCTS as well as the administrative manager for the Clinical Research Center. The CRC is a service center core, so I touch these things every day, so have a little bit of hands-on experience. As we're going through today, raise your hand, jump in with questions. We want this to be interactive and focused to the information that you want to learn and make it really beneficial for you so that you can take it back and apply some of this information to the service centers where you are and where you're developing. So with that, let's get started on the first slide deck. Definition of a service center. Service center is a centralized shared resource, and those are the two words that really make them different from just a lab that is down the hall that several people use. It needs to be open to anybody who wants to use the service center. Just because your PI has a buddy who wants to come in and use the lab, that doesn't make it a service center, even though they may buy some supplies or transfer some funds to cover some of the charges. It needs to be shared, not available just to your area. That's what makes it different from just a lab in a certain area. Provides services, may have instrumentation that is shared, technologies, as in the CRC, and I'll use that periodically through as an example, and I'm sure Heather will jump in with some of her CCC examples that say in the Clinical Research Center, we provide pretty much only services to our investigators. We have a couple of laboratories as well as we have nursing staff that help implement studies for investigators. If you want to, and when you're establishing and running a service center core, for those of us who are in OSU, Nationwide Children's has a little bit of a different way to do this, I'm sure, and you guys can work with, I suppose somebody in Wrench would be your contacts to pull it together. Would it really?
Yeah, I think so.
And these are Veronica's slides, I believe, so.
So I think for Nationwide Children's, I'm going to write down some of the questions that we come up with today that in the way that it's different for Nationwide Children's, and then I will talk to Veronica about those questions and get them kind of cleared up for Nationwide Children's. So the one thing is, who do you contact to create a shared resource? So again, for the mic, who do you contact at Nationwide Children's to create a shared resource, and what is that process? And I'll get you some actual information on that.
And I'm sure Veronica is completely open for you to give her a call. She is a vast resource and knows how to make these things happen. But at Ohio State, there's a link, and we will send the slides out to you that you can connect. Easy to find doing a search engine if you want to do that as well. You need to work with your local fiscal people. This will need to go through your senior fiscal department, work its way up, and then they'll submit it all the way up. And they suggest at least 2 months prior to starting your service center. You want to do it absolutely as soon as you can. Periodically, they get delayed. They're working on other things up in that office, and things may sit there for a while. So you want to get it sent up as soon as you can. You want to make sure that everything that you put into it as you're planning your service center core is federally compliant, using the cost principles in the uniform guidance. And there's paragraph specifically that is focused on service centers. Heather's going to jump in and we'll get this information in detail in the next slide deck. Recharge rates should go through an earnings fund, which will be set up when you set up your earnings account. The Resource Planning Office provides top-level financial oversight for it, fiscal people in your college, and working its way down to whoever is directly supervisory over the core really cover that stuff as well. And you need to make sure that you're compliant from a fiscal standpoint all the way through. Each year, OMB requires that you do it biannually, but Ohio State rules are that you have to submit a new budget with your recharge rates every year. That goes, again, through your fiscal office up to the controller's office. And again, you've got some sort of a director or manager in the core. Often, this isn't the only thing the person does. Kind of like me, I've got multiple hats, but you've got somebody that oversees the operations of the core. Needs to be available, like I said previously, to all investigators. We'll get into some of the people that might use your core. Could be internal people, students, could be external. The public could come and use your services or buy your product. Typically, you've got scientific or clinical investigators from multiple departments that are using the core. Again, that speaks to the centralness, having a central facility that people come in and use your resources. And some sort of an oversight committee that you can go to for some direction, that maybe helps set policy, that provides top-level oversight over your core. There is a guidelines that I'll just hold up. You need to go through this packet. Read this before you start going through when you're filling in your application, and then Heather's going to walk us through actually completing in detail the application. There's a lot of information here, and they do want you to follow it and make sure that you got everything in place and when they revise it.
So I just wanted to point out that those are the earnings guidelines from OSU.
Yes.
And so they're available at that website on the slide, and we're going to send the slides out after each session. But like David said, those you should read before even thinking about starting a core or an earnings operation.
And hopefully once you've read them, it doesn't make you decide, oh no, I don't want to do this. And then we go through the steps requesting the earnings fund, the forms required annually that it's not just, you have to submit a budget and some other information annually, and then need to deal with surpluses and deficits. This is the main form online that you fill in to create the form. My laser pointer does not work on the TV apparently. Just disappears into the ether. You start out with this form requesting the information that it'll be a fund. And those of you who use the OSU chart fields probably know what a fund is. If not, when you get into your service center stuff, you'll figure out what it is. Want to have some sort of a summary that you can put into that panel. Short title for your service center. For instance, in the Clinical Research Center, we just use the name of the center, the Clinical Research Center in the fund. Typically, we're going to be filling in the department, well, with this, we're going to be filling in the department earnings. Going in and if there are nodes, talk a little bit about how the nodes work. You do a lot of that with...
I do. So here, David, you just want me to take that for a second, so you have to lean over. For all of your funds, they all roll up to higher level. For example, if we're in this the CCC, so we're part of 46050. That is our department org. And when we roll up to the 4605 D node. So if you work with the College of Medicine, their D node is going to be different, but then they might have 100 different orgs underneath that D node. And so that's all that they're asking right here is what D node does your org roll up to, which is usually going to be the higher level department, or college. But then, so that's all they're really asking for there. If you don't know your D node, your department administrator should know what that is. Does anyone have any questions about D nodes or org in general?
Yeah, and throughout this whole process, you should be working with a fiscal person in your department or college, so they can help with some of these detail-y things. The request form, you work your way down to projected level of activity. Early on, it's going to be tough to know exactly what that's going to be. You want to summarize it as best that you can. Here we're talking, they've got an MOU in place already. Anything that you've got like that you want to include. Where you're going to get your business in a real short summary. Some of these other things will be covered in detail in your business plan. Rate calculations. Heather is going to go in way detail as we get into that. So you want to make sure that your costs, all of your costs are included in the calculations so that you get hourly rates or widget rates that make sense and that actually cover all of the costs. The cost details, you want to, if you can do a projection out into the next year and break it out like this, you want to do this so that you can first look at it and know that you've included all of your costs and show that you really have thought this through and have the information together. You won't want to include any unallowable costs, and we'll cover some of that a little bit later. Assets, if you've got equipment, that's going to be probably the biggest asset. You want to list it here with all the information. And there are ways in the cost calculations to depreciate your equipment costs over the years. Again, we have the proposed budget for the operating plan broken out into the categories that you've gotten from your previous spreadsheets. Customer types. You want to think through who are the people that are going to be using your service center. For probably the majority of us here, be faculty and university departments. Some of those faculty may have sponsored grants, and those funds will be used to cover the costs of the services that you provide in your service center. It's possible there could be general public. In the clinical research center, we have an analytical and development lab. We do have people come, not actually the general public, but we have people come from other universities that have us run assays for them there. So that could be another possible place that would use your services and places for you to market to, occasionally private corporations. But for the most part, it's going to be right here in this area, the university departments and the sponsored grants. Annually at OSU, you're going to need to fill in a breakout of all your costs. And these can be as complicated as they need to be. This is a pretty complicated one where they have each type of radiographic evaluation broken down and costs and all the detail like that. I've seen some that apparently went through that have one or two rates and it's an hourly rate. Those tend to be areas like biostatistics, and I think some of those have maybe 5 services that they provide depending on the level of person who's doing the biostats. It might be from a grad student to a faculty member, and it's broken out on an hourly rate. So an hourly rate, a widget rate, whatever works. The form needs to be filled in and submitted annually with any changes to your costs.
Sorry, Peter,
yeah.
To point out that if you've done that spreadsheet in the past, or if you've done fees and fee cost analysis in the past, that can be reported to the university in one of 2 ways. You can manually enter those into PeopleSoft. There are fields in PeopleSoft Financials where you can go in and actually update your fees on your own. We have so many fees in the Cancer Center that we fill out that spreadsheet, which is a university-provided document, and we just send it to them, and then they go in and they manually upload it into PeopleSoft. So there are 2 different ways. If you've never seen that form and you've looked at fees before, it might be because someone is actually manually entering them into PeopleSoft for you.
And I know on the CRC, we always do the Excel spreadsheet as well and submit it up into the College of Medicine, and they submit it.
I do know work on the fees, and they get those reported annually. So that's not probably a requirement for you able to get out of.
Back to the guidelines, here's some summary information on the guidelines that I held up a minute ago. Under certain circumstances, when primary customers, the general public, or people acting as the general public, you may be able to have a budget surplus at the end of the year. Typically, we want a zero-sum game that at the end of the year you've got zero balance in your account. This would be something like the athletic department has their service center and they sell tickets at a profit, and they expect to have a balance at the end of the year that then they turn into libraries and salaries and things like that. Our goal, for the most part, in most of your research areas, you're going to want the zero-sum game at the end of the year and not be worried about having an operating surplus, or hopefully won't have an operating surplus. It's not allowed if you're funded by grants or contracts at the federal level, and Heather will get into some of those details with the FAQ that she goes through. The reason behind that is that they don't want gouging to go on and profit taking from grants. They want you to include your exact costs, and that's all you charge to the federal government. At the end of the year, you shouldn't have more than 60 days of working capital. That's kind of the threshold that they look at, that you have a profit past that. And at that point, you cannot move those monies into another fund. You need to leave it in your earnings account. If you're over that 17%, which is the 60 days, the next year they would expect you to reduce your fees so that by the end of the year you have zero balance at the end of that year. And some of this, it's, especially when you're starting out the service center, it's a guessing game to an extent. You don't know how many customers are going to come and use you. You don't know which services are going to be used. You've got to do your best guess. You've got to do all your research and get your business plan together so that you've got those data. But you don't really know until it happens, and then you get a feel for what the annual cycle is going to be.